Dark Sleep Radio is back, and I'm here to share another real-life encounter from the wilderness. Before we get started, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Drop a comment and let me know. 2 summers ago, I found this perfect, secluded camping spot about 6 miles off the logging road, near a creek that flows into Lake Winnipesaukee. It was just a flat, mossy patch I'd discovered during a previous hike, completely off the grid and away from everything. After a brutal month at work, I needed some serious downtime. I packed my standard camping gear, a single-person tent, jet boil, folding saw, and some freeze-dried meals. Nothing complicated. As always, I told my sister my exact location and expected return date. The first night was uneventful. I set up camp just before sunset, started a small fire, and ate a less than appetizing chicken rice pouch before turning in early. Despite temperatures dropping to the high 30s, my winter sleeping bag kept me comfortable. Day 2 was pretty standard. I hiked upriver and noticed some massive, fresh moose prints in the mud. By dusk, I was back at camp, boiling water and preparing dinner. As darkness fell, I decided to do some stargazing from a granite outcrop just above my tent. The night was crystal clear. Satellites dotted the sky, and the usual background sounds of frogs and occasional twig snaps created a subtle soundtrack. No wind stirred the trees. Around 10:20, something changed. I didn't hear anything at first. Instead, I felt a strange vibration, not from the ground but through the air itself. It was a deep, heavy pressure, like being near a massive speaker set to an almost inaudible volume. Suddenly, everything went silent. The frogs stopped. No chirping, no movement. When I switched off my headlamp, the landscape looked unchanged. Stars still filled the sky, but something was definitely different. The night felt different from the start. I was on the ridge when something changed. The stars above me weren't just moving, they were vanishing. A chunk of sky went completely black, bigger than a football field, right above the tree line. This wasn't clouds or a trick of light. The Big Dipper and Orion were still visible, but this darkness was something else entirely. It wasn't making any sound, no humming, no buzzing, but I could feel its presence, a heavy pressure in my chest, like standing next to something massive. The blackness didn't have a clear shape, just an absolute darkness deeper than the trees around me. Then, almost imperceptibly, it drifted left. That's when I knew this was real. It moved like something underwater, but in the sky. I could track its movement by the stars it blocked and then revealed. No light came from it, no outline visible. I could only see it by what it obscured. My instinct was pure survival. I didn't run, didn't breathe hard. Something told me not to draw attention, as if being noticed would trigger something terrible. I backed down the hill slowly, eyes locked on this strange darkness. Reaching my tent, I zipped inside and covered myself with my sleeping bag, feeling like a child hiding from a storm. I killed my headlamp, not wanting anything to glow. Complete silence surrounded me. No wind, no insects, not even the creek made a sound. The world seemed paused. Gradually, the oppressive feeling lifted. Sounds returned piece by piece, a splash in the creek, a moth hitting the tent wall, frogs starting their chorus. I stayed inside until dawn. When enough light filtered through, I packed up quickly. No coffee, no breakfast. I cut through the bush instead of taking my original trail, avoiding that hill completely. Something had happened that night, something I couldn't explain. I was running my usual trail loop at Pine Hollow, a forested path outside Asheville that locals know but tourists rarely find. It was a cool, dry Thursday, in mid-October, just before sunset around 6:30. Leaves were falling, making that dry, skittering sound across the gravel that always makes you feel like someone might be following you. I had my phone in a waist pouch with one earbud playing music, my old Fitbit on my wrist. No headlamp, since I wasn't planning to be out past 7. The full loop is just under 5 miles, and I typically finish in about 40 minutes. First couple miles were normal, though I was moving a bit slower than usual, tired from work. I saw one other runner heading the opposite direction, a tall guy in a gray hoodie. We exchanged just a quick nod. Around 2.5 miles in, the trail forks near a wooden signpost. Right goes toward the lower creek loop, left back to the parking lot. I took the right path like always. Right after the fork, something strange happened. My music cut out completely, not paused, just dead silence. I pulled out my phone and the screen was black. Wouldn't turn on, even though it had been at 60% battery when I started. I tried holding the power button with no luck. I glanced at my watch. No heart rate, no pace tracking, just the time showing 6:53. That didn't make sense. I'd started the run at 6:12 and I should have been almost done, but I was barely 3 miles in. The trees were getting thicker and the sun was dipping low through the branches. Later that night, I checked the weather for the area. Clear skies, no clouds, no aircraft advisories, nothing unusual. I couldn't explain what happened. No signal until I was halfway down the mountain. When I finally called my sister, I didn't mention anything weird, just said I came back early. I kept thinking about that massive thing hanging silently above the trees. No mechanical sounds, no lights, just there. And somehow knowing exactly how to stay completely quiet. No reports of anything in New Hampshire, no power outages, no sonic booms, just silence. The trail had a washed-out gray feel that set me on edge. My footsteps echoed strangely in an unsettling silence. No birds chirped, no wind rustled. Just a flat, empty sound punctuated by occasional branch cracks somewhere off the path. Near the creek, I noticed something was off. The wooden footbridge stood before me, but I realized I hadn't seen another soul. No bikers, no hikers, which was unusual even at this hour. I slowed down and checked my watch. 6:53, it read. I waited for the minute to change. It didn't. Time seemed to hang suspended. Lightheadedness crept over me, and I knelt by the creek, splashing freezing water on my face. The shock brought a momentary clarity. When I stood, the landscape had subtly shifted. Trees looked taller, denser. The footbridge had vanished as if I'd already passed it without remembering. The trail behind me curved differently, the ground soft like moss instead of gravel. Turning slowly, I couldn't determine my original direction. Choosing a path, I started jogging, trying to convince myself this was just disorientation. Then I heard it, a clicking sound. Not footsteps, but like stones tapping together. Quick, deliberate. A few seconds, then silence. I turned. Nothing was there. Running faster now, I eventually rounded another bend and spotted something familiar. A fallen pine with a horseshoe-shaped knot I always stepped over. I was back on the loop. My watch read 6:54. Suddenly, the screen flickered. The time jumped to 7:08. My heart rate normalized. Step count reset. My phone buzzed, showing 2 missed calls from my wife and 32% battery. I didn't pause to check messages. I just ran. The Gallatin Range in late October carries a sharp, wet smell that hints at the first snow. Cold enough to see your breath, but not yet frozen. My cousin Blake and I were camped about 5 miles off any trail, doing our annual bow hunting trip for elk. We've always done this old school, no cell, service, no GPS, just us. We'd set up camp near a small stream in a clearing we discovered years ago. Good visibility, and elk tracks were everywhere in the soft mud by the water. The first 2 days had shown some signs, but nothing particularly fresh. We mostly sat in treants, glassed ridges, and made calls. Pretty standard hunting routine. That third night, we turned in early. We'd covered nearly 10 miles, and Blake had slightly tweaked his ankle coming down a ravine. Nothing serious, just sore. We ate some freeze-dried chili, shared a bit of bourbon, and were in our sleeping bags by 9 or 9:30. Around midnight, I woke up to relieve myself. The tent was silent, no wind stirring. Moonlight was bright through the nylon. Stepping outside barefoot, I paused to let my eyes adjust. Then I heard it. Not loud, but a low, steady hum like a distant plane, yet slower and deeper. Constant, with no variation, but I could feel it in my chest, seeming to rise through the ground. Not painful, just dense, like standing next to a massive speaker. Weeks later, I was running a familiar trail. I finished around 7:20, full darkness enveloping the empty parking lot. I drove straight home. That night, my Fitbit data raised questions. It showed I'd run 9.7 miles, but when I mapped the route, I couldn't stretch the loop past 5.5 miles, even accounting for potential wrong turns. I knew the trail, the trees, the signs, that distinctive horseshoe knot, all clear in my memory. The device also logged a heart rate spike to 170 BPM around 6:54, lasting 12 minutes before returning to normal. I didn't recall my heart racing like that, or what might have caused it. Strangest of all was a GPS track gap between 6:54 and 7:08, a complete blank section. No path, no location data. It resumed as if I'd teleported. I kept quiet about it for weeks. When I finally returned to the trail, something felt off. The fork looked different, somehow smaller, less steep. Standing there, I thought, this isn't where it happened. I haven't run that loop since. The hum came from everywhere with no clear source or direction. It was constant, low, and even. I stood frozen, my heart racing, for maybe 20 seconds. Blake unzipped the tent and asked, "You hear that?" I didn't respond. Around us, the trees in the clearing started shifting. Their branches moved without any breeze, and leaves rustled as if wind were passing through them. The sound began circling us, not like a car driving by, but moving in a wide, steady ring through the woods. It wasn't fast, maybe a couple miles an hour, but it was methodical. Blake whispered, "What the hell is that?" I admitted I didn't know. We crouched by the tent in our socks, listening intently. The rustling sound completed a full loop, about 60 or 70 feet out, then started again. When I reached for my headlamp, Blake grabbed my wrist and shook his head. "Don't," he mouthed. "Just listen." The low vibration resonated in our chests as the invisible presence continued its slow, wide circle through the branches and undergrowth. I strained to hear footsteps or snapping twigs, but there was nothing, just the leaves. After 3 complete loops, everything stopped, abruptly. No fade, just silence. The hum vanished instantly, and even the usual nighttime sounds, crickets, owls, disappeared. We waited a minute before Blake whispered, "We need to get inside." Quickly, we climbed back into the tent and zipped it up, keeping our boots close. Silence enveloped us. Later, I'm not sure how much time passed, I heard something else. Footsteps. 2 soft steps, then nothing. Another step, like someone in socks moving carefully on moss. They weren't close, maybe 15 or 20 feet away to the right of the tent. I couldn't determine if it was one person moving slowly or multiple people taking turns. Blake was awake. I could feel him holding perfectly, still across from me. The night was dark, but not fully black, that deep blue just before total darkness. I was flying my '72 Piper Cherokee, a plane my dad passed down to me, heading northeast from Fallon, Nevada toward Elko. The flight was just over 200 miles, and conditions were perfect. Clear weather, no wind, early spring with a chill at higher altitudes. I'd made this route countless times. Out here, it's nothing but desert, mountains, peaks, and occasional mining roads. Empty, but beautiful in its stark way. About 40 minutes into the flight, I was cruising steady at 6,500 feet. Everything felt unusually smooth. Gauges looked good, engine temperature, oil pressure, RPMs, all normal. I leaned back, watching the sky, when suddenly I started feeling like something was watching me. Sounds crazy, I know. Years before, something similar happened during a camping trip with Blake. We were deep in the wilderness, and something felt off. In the middle of the night, a strange clicking sound started, like 2 rocks tapping together. 2 clicks, pause, then 3, then 4 fast ones. I gripped my hunting knife, knowing it wouldn't help if something was out there, but it made me feel less helpless. When morning came, Blake was already outside by the fire pit. "It's all gone," he said. Walking behind the tent, I saw why. The entire clearing's edge was ringed with flattened underbrush, not trampled, but perfectly pressed down. Dead leaves, ferns, small saplings, all bent about 3 or 4 inches, as if something heavy had hovered just above the ground. The ring was nearly 70 feet in diameter, almost perfectly circular. We packed up quickly, skipping breakfast, and hiked out. Neither of us spoke much. 4 years later, we still hunt together, but not deep in the wilderness, and never overnight. I was flying routine when something caught my attention. Not a sound or movement, just an odd sense that something was off. I scanned the cabin first, then looked outside. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance, but then I noticed a strange spot in the upper right of the windshield, high above me. It looked like a section of night sky with fewer stars, except this patch wasn't behaving normally. While other stars rose and faded as I moved, this particular area remained perfectly still. About the size of my thumb at arm's length, it wasn't truly black, but a featureless void that seemed to absorb light without reflecting any. No outline, no blinking, no visible movement, yet definitely present. I kept glancing between this anomaly and my instrument panel, checking to confirm I wasn't imagining things. After 10 minutes, I was certain. Whatever this was, it was matching my speed and direction precisely. When I leaned forward for a better view, the thing didn't budge. It was like someone had punched a clean hole through the starry sky and suspended it above my aircraft. I radioed Reno Center, asking about potential traffic, maybe a drone or military craft. They confirmed clear skies for 50 miles in every direction. Carefully, I mentioned seeing something unusual that didn't behave like a standard aircraft. The controller repeated there was nothing on radar. Curious, I decided to test its behavior. I banked into a shallow left turn, shifting course by a few degrees. The sky patch followed, but not instantly. It lagged by a second or two, then slid back to its original position. This response unnerved me. Objects in the sky don't typically hover motionlessly without propulsion or sound. I experimented further, climbing and descending several hundred feet. Each time, the anomaly adjusted slightly, always remaining behind and to the right above my wing, silent, invisible, persistent. I was flying, hands steady on the yoke, when something caught my eye. A patch in the sky, just sitting there, not moving, not changing. I opened the side vent window and stuck my hand out. The air was biting cold, and the wind drowned out any potential sounds. No engine whine, no rotor chop, nothing. Minutes ticked by. I kept flying, stealing occasional glances. The patch never got closer, never drifted. It just hung there, suspended in the darkness. Then the radio died, not suddenly, but with a weird popping noise like bad speaker wiring. Silence followed. I tried both comm channels, adjusted the squelch, nothing. No static, just dead quiet. My phone wouldn't turn on either, though the screen lit up. It wasn't a battery issue. The altimeter and oil temp were working normally, so it wasn't a complete electrical failure. Just the radio and phone were affected. A strange pressure filled the cabin. Not like altitude pressure. This felt different, more like being underwater. My teeth felt heavy, the air dense and thick. Sounds became muffled, as if cotton had been stuffed in my ears. The engine tone didn't change, but everything sounded dulled. I looked back, and the sky patch was gone. Stars filled the spot where it had been. I banked harder, scanning every direction. Nothing moved. Seconds later, the radio crackled back to life mid-transmission. Reno Center was talking to another aircraft about altimeter settings. My systems worked fine now. The phone remained locked up until I landed. I flew the rest of the way, gripping the yoke, staring straight ahead. No music, no looking outside. I landed at Elko just before midnight, taxied to the hangar, and shut down without a word to the ground crew. For 2 days, my ears rang, not like altitude fatigue, but deeper. I didn't report anything. There was nothing to explain, no evidence to show. The following week, I flew the same route at the same time. Clear skies, nothing unusual. But now, I can't help glancing up every few minutes, making sure the stars are exactly where they should be. The night was cool, maybe in the low 40s, as I drove home from my brother's place northwest of Portland. Mid-October, the sky was clear and starlit. Harper, my golden retriever, was unusually restless, pawing at the passenger seat and whining. About 45 minutes from my brother's, on a stretch of Highway 26 cutting through dense forest, the car pulled slightly to the right. I pulled over to the shoulder, turned on the hazards, and stepped out to investigate. The front right tire was nearly flat. The spot was just before a curve, surrounded by towering fir and cedar trees pressing close to the road. An eerie stillness hung in the air. No breeze, no rustling, just distant traffic sounds. As I crouched by the tire, something strange caught my attention. The trees seemed to be bending, not swaying, but subtly leaning away from something invisible above the car. At first, I thought it might be a trick of the darkness, but Harper's behavior confirmed something was off. She sat nearby, ears perked, staring intently upward, unusual for her unless a squirrel was around. I scanned the sky. Stars blazed brightly, no clouds, no moonlight filtering through the branches. Circling the car, I shone my phone's flashlight, watching the branches part just enough to reveal the sky. No aircraft, no drone, no blinking light, just an empty black patch. The air felt heavy, pressing down, making my skin prickle. Harper continued pacing, whining. I tried calling my brother, hoping to hear a familiar voice, but the call went straight to voicemail. No signal, typical for this area where hills and trees often blocked service. Something felt deeply wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what. We were up at my brother-in-law's place in Oregon. His property sits at the edge of a high grassy bluff that looks out over dense forest. I was changing a flat tire on my car, working quickly to get back on the road. Harper, my dog, was right beside me, unusually tense. Something felt off. The top trees in the distance started to behave strangely, leaning and stretching in ways trees shouldn't move. A dark, almost invisible ripple hung in the air above my car, barely perceptible like a heat mirage, but cold and unsettling. Harper growled softly, her body rigid with alertness. The forest went completely silent. No crickets, no birds, no wind, just an eerie stillness that made the hair on my neck stand up. My phone buzzed with a random system update message, despite having no signal. When I looked up again, the trees suddenly straightened, as if nothing had happened. I hurried to finish changing the tire, with Harper staying close and watchful. Once done, I climbed back into the car and pulled onto the highway. Harper collapsed in the passenger seat, exhausted. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw the trees along the shoulder were still subtly bending. But once I was about 100 yards down the road, they snapped back to their normal position. I kept watching until the forest became a dark line on the horizon. At home, I checked the tire in daylight. There was no damage, just slightly low pressure, as if I'd driven over soft gravel. I told a few friends about the experience. They suggested wind or my imagination might be responsible. But I know what I saw wasn't normal. Those trees didn't move naturally. Whatever was up there wanted to remain unseen. Since that night, I haven't returned to that stretch of highway. We were up for the weekend. Me, Lauren, her brother Josh, and our 6-year-old daughter Hazel. It was early September, clear and warm, with temperatures in the low 70s. The landscape stretched out before us. A big basin with trees and scrub below, hills in the far distance. The kind of place where your ears pop if you hike down too quickly. No neighbors, no power lines, just sky, grass, and wind. I'd brought this old Delta kite from the garage, neon orange with a long black tail. Hazel spotted it and begged to fly it. Around 3 in the afternoon, the wind became perfect, steady, not gusty. We walked to the far side of the yard, an open space right before a sharp drop-off. No obstacles, just air. Josh helped me launch the kite. We had about 100 feet of line on a big spool. I let it rise slowly, while Hazel held the handle, squealing with excitement. Lauren watched from the porch, taking pictures. Josh stood behind us, beer in hand. For the first 10 minutes, everything was normal. The kite climbed smoothly, barely wobbling. I showed Hazel how to work the spool, keeping the line taut. Then, in less than a second, something changed. The kite suddenly snapped sideways, hard, not from a gust, but as if yanked by an unseen force. It jerked 40 or 50 degrees to the right, toward a patch of clear sky. Hazel nearly lost her grip from the sudden movement. Then it started rising, not drifting, but going straight up. I thought the string might have snapped, but it remained in her hands, taut and unmoving. It didn't flutter or whip around. Instead, it went vertical, as if something from above was pulling it in a direct line. I took the spool from Hazel without thinking. Trying to reel it in, I found the string too tight. It burned against the spindle when I tried. Josh stepped up beside me. "What the hell?" he muttered as we watched the kite simply vanish. It didn't snap or fall. One moment it was a bright orange triangle in the sky, and the next, nothing. But the string remained. We were holding this thin kite line, watching it rise into an empty sky. No planes, no birds, no clouds, just this single white thread stretching upward. A heavy silence fell over us. Hazel clutched my leg, her mouth hanging open, not uttering a word. Then the line began moving. Not swaying, not dropping, but climbing, pulled by something other than wind. I felt a constant, deliberate tension through the spool, like an unseen force. Sea was methodically ascending the string. It kept rising until my grip failed. The line didn't snap, it simply slipped away. The spool hit the ground, rolling and buzzing as the last of the string unspooled. When it struck the knot, everything stopped. We stood frozen, nobody wanting to touch it. Josh finally approached and picked it up. The string remained perfectly vertical and taut, defying gravity. He tested it gently at first, then with more force. Nothing moved. "I don't like this," Lauren muttered. We carried the spool back to the house, the line remaining rigidly straight the entire time. I wondered what could be holding it, but the sky above was completely empty. I secured the string to the porch railing and sat watching for hours. The tension never wavered. As evening fell, I stepped out around 9 and discovered the string had vanished. Not broken or frayed, simply gone. The end remained tied to the railing, but the line itself disappeared cleanly, about 4 inches out. The next morning, I searched the slope, hoping to find some trace of the kite. Nothing. No string, no kite, not a single piece. Reporting it seemed ridiculous. How could I explain that the sky had seemingly swallowed our kite? We drove home that afternoon. Hazel was unusually quiet, staring silently out the window without even asking for her tablet, behavior completely unlike her. Days later, I discovered something strange. The kite's tail, perfectly intact, lying in the truck bed. No string, no frame, just the tail. I kept this thin black ribbon in the garage. I don't know why. Lauren doesn't know I saved it. Night fishing wasn't something I ever imagined doing, but my son Eli changed that one summer evening at Lake Winona, about 20 minutes from our home in northern Wisconsin. I'd grown up around lakes, mostly doing daytime activities like swimming and canoeing. Night fishing seemed slow, but Eli's determination won me over. We left around 8 p.m., packed with gear, fishing rods, tackle box, and a cooler of snacks and soda. The sky was clear, the air warm with that distinct dusk lake smell. Eli brought his flashlight and Rufus, his old beagle mix with big ears and a constantly wagging tail. The lake was quiet. Crickets chirped in the grass, a lone call echoed across the water, and waves gently lapped against the shore. We settled on a small dock, casting lines into the black water. Eli was completely engaged, discussing fish behavior, water temperature, and potential bass hiding below. Rufus sat between us, alert and attentive, his eyes shifting between water and shore. I relaxed, watching stars emerge, enjoying the peaceful silence away from city noise. We caught a couple of small perch, releasing them back. Everything felt normal until something strange began happening. A soft splash came from behind us, right near the dock. I turned, seeing nothing, no jumping fish, no spreading ripples, just dark water reflecting moonlight. The splash repeated, first after 15 minutes, then again 15 minutes later. Eli hadn't seen anything. I wondered about fish jumping or a duck, but something felt off. The consistent, unexplained splashes were peculiar. The dock fell silent, save for the rhythmic splashes that seemed to follow a strange, precise pattern. Every 15 minutes, almost to the second, something was breaking the water's surface. Rufus, usually calm, now stood rigid with his ears perked up, staring intently into the darkness. My son Eli was visibly unsettled, and even Rufus let out an unusual low growl. The water remained eerily still between these calculated disturbances. I tried rationalizing it, maybe a raccoon throwing stones or an underwater creature moving just out of sight, but my flashlight revealed nothing, and the surrounding woods were completely silent. The atmosphere felt unnaturally suspended. No breeze stirred, no insects buzz, zed, no distant sounds echoed. The lake seemed frozen in a moment of anticipation. Eli broke the silence, asking nervously, "Dad, do you think something's watching us?" I wanted to dismiss his fears, but something felt fundamentally wrong. Around 9:30, Rufus suddenly sprang up, his fur bristling. He barked sharply and raced to the dock's edge, staring into the water. My flashlight revealed only blackness. Then came another precise splash, this time directly behind us. A deep, inexplicable chill ran through me. These splashes defied natural explanation. No fish I knew could maintain such methodical timing. As I scanned the water's surface, only starlight and moonlight flickered across the gentle waves. Eli whispered, "Maybe the lake itself is alive." I managed a weak smile and responded, "Maybe, kid." We lingered a while longer. The splashes continued, occurring exactly every 15 minutes, the last one at 10:05. An unshakable sense of unease remained, even after the sounds stopped. Rufus paced restlessly between us and the shore. While packing up, I glimpsed something dark and low moving just beneath the water near the shoreline, like a fleeting shadow. When I aimed my flashlight, it vanished instantly. On our drive home, Eli remained silent, repeatedly glancing back into the woods. The forest was alive with spring smells that morning, damp earth, fresh pine, and wild flowers just starting to poke through the moss. I'd left my little cabin around 7 a.m., Juniper and I hitting the trail by 7:30. She's a mixed breed with a scruffy dark brown coat and sharp ears that pick up on everything, bouncing ahead of me with her nose down in the dirt. It was late spring in the Cascades, somewhere between Snoqualmie and Stevens Pass. The day started cool and cloudy, with snow finally melting off the higher trails. The first couple of hours were pretty normal, birds chirping, the distant rush of melting snow in the creek beside us. The trail climbed steadily through thick fir and alder, a light fog hanging low between the trees. After about an hour and a half, I left the main trail at a fork, taking a less traveled loop my friend had mentioned. It was supposed to circle around a small meadow before reconnecting further down. That's when I noticed something strange. Right at the edge of the clearing was a patch of ground that looked odd, almost perfectly circular, about 15 feet across. The grass inside was flattened and darker green, like it had been trampled or pressed down somehow. Curious, I stepped off the trail and walked toward it with Juniper trailing behind. As soon as I crossed the edge of that circle, the birds stopped singing. Not gradually or quietly, just gone. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath. Later, checking my lines and gear, nothing was out of place. No fish caught, no water disturbed beyond those splashes. I couldn't explain it, the regularity, the silence, the way the water seemed aware. Every time I think back to that night, I remember the lake holding its breath, waiting, with a splash behind us exactly every 15 minutes, like a signal only the water knew how to send. The forest had always been my sanctuary, but that day, something was different. I was hiking with Juniper when we stumbled into a circle where sound simply vanished. The creek's babble disappeared, replaced by an unnatural silence that felt like being underwater. Juniper sensed it immediately. Her ears twitched, her tail lowered, and she didn't make a sound, just stared intently into the circle's center. When I knelt down to listen, the quiet was overwhelming, unlike anything I'd experienced before. It was as if someone had muted the entire world. Experimenting, I stepped in and out of the circle. Outside, forest sounds rushed back, birds chirping, wind rustling, Juniper barking at a passing jay. Inside, the silence returned insta. Thinking it might be some natural acoustic phenomenon, I tried recording audio on my phone. That's when things got strange. My phone malfunctioned, its screen flickering and going black. It worked perfectly outside the circle, but died every time I entered. Juniper grew anxious, whining and circling my feet. Then I saw them. Shadows at the circle's edge, darker than the surrounding trees, almost smoke-like. They weren't quite stationary. One shifted, another seemed to blink into existence. They didn't approach, but their presence was undeniably menacing. The silence grew heavier, pressing against my chest. My heart raced. I called Juniper and backed out of the circle, watching the shadows fade into the forest. The rest of the hike felt surreal, with Juniper constantly looking over her shoulder. Back at the cabin, I checked my phone's footage. The trail videos were normal, but the clips from that clearing were pure static. No sound, no image, just white noise. I don't understand what happened in that circle. But one thing's certain, I'm not going back there alone. Night after night, something strange was happening in my backyard. It started small, almost unnoticeable. My neighborhood outside Athens, Georgia, isn't rural or dense suburban, just a spread of houses with deep yards, some fenced, some open. My property backs up to a narrow wooded area that slopes down toward a shallow creek, with a small shed at the far edge and a line of overgrowth and pine trees. The first incident seemed unremarkable. A motion light came on at 3:13 a.m., and I assumed it was just another animal, raccoons, stray cats, or deer slipping through the back hedges. Half asleep, I'd glanced at my phone and noticed the time. The cold LED flood illuminated the entire yard as usual. But when I checked the camera footage the next morning, something was off. There was nothing, no animal, no movement. Just a split second of static, not even a full second. It was like the frame had simply stuttered. The second night followed the same pattern. My greyhound mix, Ellis, who normally sleeps deeply, became restless around 3 a.m. He paced to the back door, standing stiffly with his ears forward. When the motion light activated at 3:13, he backed up, not barking, just staring intently through the glass, as if waiting for something. I opened the curtain. The yard appeared empty. The next morning's camera review revealed the same peculiar glitch. The The recording ran normally until 3:13, then blipped to static before returning 3 seconds later. No movement, no motion before or after. The camera was a standard outdoor model with infrared, night vision, and cloud backup. It had never had issues before, or having previously captured everything from possums to my neighbor's kids breaking curfew. But this was different. It was as if the entire recording had simply skipped. On the third night, I was prepared. I stayed up, keeping all lights off and brewing coffee around 2 a.m. Sitting in the dark kitchen with Ellis asleep at my feet, I turned off the camera app, determined to witness whatever was happening with my own eyes. The yard remained dark and still, without wind or rustling. Then, precisely at 3:13, the motion light came on instantly. No flickering, no gradual increase, just immediate illumination. I stood and leaned toward the window. Nothing moved. Stepping onto the porch, I noticed Ellis staying inside, ears low and tail tucked. The air felt unnaturally thick. Something was definitely not right. Every night for a week, something strange happened. At exactly 3:13 a.m., my motion light would turn on, and both my cameras would catch the same bizarre interference. It started subtly, a weird heaviness in the air, like unexpected humidity on an otherwise cool and dry day. I'd been watching closely since the first night. The cameras showed nothing unusual until that precise moment. Static for exactly 3 seconds, then back to normal. I began setting alarms, sitting up with Ellis, my dog, watching the back window. He seemed as unsettled as I was, making low whining sounds and backing into the hallway. One night, I heard a sharp click near the shed. When the light came on, everything looked normal. The shed door was shut, nothing on the ground, no movement. I checked the shed the next morning, padlock secure, nothing disturbed. So I got a second camera from my friend Leo, mounted on a different corner of the house with a separate power source and brand. The result was the same, frame-perfect static at 3:13 a.m. on both cameras. I couldn't explain how two completely independent systems could be interrupted simultaneously. On the seventh night, something changed. For a split second, I saw a shape in the yard. Not quite human, taller, unnaturally thin, like something that didn't belong. Then it vanished. No movement, no sound. Just light, then darkness. Ellis whimpered and hid behind the couch, refusing to come out until morning. I still can't explain what happened during those 7 nights, but I know what I saw, or thought I saw. Both camera feeds that night were static at 31:03:01, then clear at 3:04. I kept rewinding and fast-forwarding until my eyes ached, searching for any sign of a figure. Nothing. Sleep evaded me that night. For the next several nights, nothing happened. The lights stayed off. Cameras ran normally. Everything seemed to stop as quickly as it had started. I hadn't changed a thing. No firmware updates, no new bulbs, no camera repositioning. My 3:13 a.m. phone alarm still exists, but I no longer respond. Ellis sleeps soundly again. The yard remains dark. The only difference, and I'm unsure if it matters, was moving a lawn chair about a foot left the morning after the last light trigger. Just a small adjustment to its position. I've been checking the camera feed religiously. The past 2 weeks are archived, showing nothing unusual. No static, no motion triggers, just quiet, uneventful nights. Leo was the only person I told. He glanced at the video and shrugged it off as possible Wi-Fi interference or a power fluctuation. But something felt different. The timing was too precise. The air seemed charged, like something was barely present. I can't shake the memory of the shape I might have seen. Ellis won't go near the shed anymore. For 7 exact nights, something appeared in my yard, causing everything to blink out for 3 seconds. Now it's gone. Or maybe not. The first time I noticed the light, I was driving west on I-80 through Nevada, somewhere between Winnemucca and Battle Mountain. Close to midnight, the sky was clear, moonless, and hot in that oppressive desert way where heat lingers long after sunset. I just refueled in Elko, with another 4 or 5 hours of driving ahead before planning to rest in the cab. Bonnie, my squat, wiry-haired dog with mismatched ears, slept soundly in the passenger seat. She never liked desert driving. This wasn't my usual route. A pileup near Boise had forced me to detour south. I'd done night stretches solo before, but something about this journey felt unsettling. Maybe it was the heat, maybe something else. The highway stretched endlessly under my headlights. a dark ribbon that seemed to resist ending. I'd been driving for about 20 minutes past a closed way station when something caught my eye in the driver's side mirror. At first, I thought it was just another car with high beams, but this wasn't normal. The light didn't pass me, didn't fall back. It just hung there, exactly 20 yards behind and slightly off to the side, right in my blind spot. When I flicked on the rear cab lights, it was still there, but not like any headlights I'd seen before. It was a single glowing orb, white, almost blue, raw, diating a soft light that didn't spread like a normal headlamp. I watched it in the mirror, waiting for it to drift away, but it didn't. Instead, it matched my every move precisely. I slowed down. It slowed. I sped up. It sped up, always maintaining that exact same distance. Bonnie, my dog, suddenly sat up and started whining softly. Her ears twitched, and she was staring intently toward the back of the cab, as if hearing something I couldn't. She let out a quiet growl, then quickly retreated to the sleeper, burrowing under my blanket. This wasn't like her. She only does this during fireworks or thunderstorms, never on a clear night in the middle of nowhere. Curious, I rolled down the window and leaned out, trying to get a better view. The moment I did, the mirror went completely dark. When I pulled back in, the orb was right back where it had been, as if nothing had happened. I switched to the passenger mirror, but saw nothing. No matter how I jerked the wheel to catch a different angle, it only appeared in the driver's side mirror. This went on for about 40 minutes. Just the hum of tires, the dark road sliding by, and this glowing ball seemingly pacing my truck. I realized the radio had been picking up static, even though I was streaming from my phone with a perfect signal. My GPS had frozen too, stuck at a highway bend I'd long since passed. Something was definitely not right. The mirror caught my attention first. My GPS flickered, the little dot marking my truck frozen in place, even though I could clearly see the highway moving beneath me through the windshield. A strange pressure started building in my ears, not painful exactly, but thick like being underwater or climbing too quickly. I swallowed and yawned, trying to clear them. Bonnie suddenly barked sharply from the back, startling me. Her eyes were wide and glassy, her breathing heavy, as if she'd just run a marathon. I kept glancing at the mirror, watching for something I couldn't quite define. Around 1:10 a.m., the entire truck cab flickered. Dashboard lights dimmed and returned, the air conditioner stuttered, and my headlights pulsed briefly before stabilizing. In an instant, whatever had been in the mirror vanished. No gradual fade, just gone. I pulled off at the next rest area, about 10 minutes down the road. Not a single other vehicle was in sight. Under a broken street lamp, I parked in one of the truck slots and killed the engine. Bonnie, unusually clingy, crawled into my lap, something she hadn't done since she was a puppy. Walking a full circle around the trailer, I checked everything meticulously. No tire issues, no loose straps, nothing suspicious on the road. With a flashlight, I even searched back up the on-ramp, half expecting to find a crashed drone in the roadside brush. Nothing. Back in the truck, I tried photographing the mirror, hoping to capture something unusual, but it was just an ordinary mirror, clean and empty. I remained at the rest area until morning, periodically checking the mirror, always finding nothing. By dawn, Bonnie had calmed enough to eat a little. Watching the sunrise, I finally felt ready to continue. The GPS had mysteriously unfrozen around 4 a.m., and all systems seemed normal. I never saw the orb again. I completed the haul, arriving in Sacramento a day early. I took a different route back east, the rest of the journey completely uneventful. I live a little outside Helena, Montana, on a few acres backed up to Forest Service land. It's quiet, with good sky visibility and no streetlights, perfect for shooting stars. Last spring, I started taking long exposure photos, mostly because I couldn't sleep after my job switched to remote following the layoffs. I'd go out around 11, set up in the field behind the barn using a Sony A7 and an old college tripod. Nothing fancy. I'd usually spend an hour or two taking slow with 30-second exposures of the night sky, sometimes stacking them to create star trails or adjusting contrast and saturation. One Tuesday night, the sky was especially clear. I almost skipped my usual photography session after working late, but the conditions were too good to waste. Facing northeast toward the tree line, I began taking my standard shots. During my warm-up, something caught my attention. There was a bright point just above the horizon that remained completely stationary. While other stars would streak slightly with exposure time or rotation, this one didn't move at all, not even a pixel. I initially thought it might be Venus or a plane heading directly toward me, but it didn't blink or change in intensity. I took multiple photos with varying exposure times. Every shot showed the same result. Everything else had a slight motion blur, but this single dot remained crisp and still. Digital zoom revealed nothing unusual, just a sharp white point with no color fringing or lens artifacts. I even tried walking side to side to check for parallax, but the point stayed locked in its exact position. Eventually, the cold drove me inside. I tried to rationalize it as a geostationary satellite, though I knew that didn't quite make sense. Since that night, I won't run through that part of Nevada again. I'll detour 100 miles if necessary. I can't explain what I saw, and I've been driving long haul for over 12 years without ever encountering anything like it before. Maybe there's a normal explanation, a light reflection, mirror trick, or strange drone, but I doubt it. I noticed something strange in the sky one night, a white dot, fixed and unmoving, unlike anything else up there. At first, I didn't tell anyone or take photos. I just felt unsettled. The next night, I saw it again in the same spot. Using a star map app, I tried to identify it. The app showed stars, planets, and satellites, but this point wasn't recognized. For 20 minutes, I watched it from the grass, hands in my coat pockets. Then, suddenly, it vanished. Not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. I double-checked the weather and radar. Nothing unusual. Clear skies, no atmospheric disturbances. Over the next few nights, it didn't reappear. Then on Sunday, I spotted it again, this time slightly higher and west of its original position. Same characteristics, bright, stationary, unblinking. Curious, I took 5 photos over 15 minutes and overlaid them in Photoshop. Every star showed movement trails, but this dot remained perfectly still. Something about it felt off. It wasn't just a distant object, it felt like it was observing me. I know it sounds strange, but I felt studied, watched. I stopped going outside for 2 weeks. Then one night, unable to sleep, I took my dog Clover out. She's usually quick to do her business, but this time was different. Halfway off the porch, she froze, ears up, tail rigid, staring into the darkness. Following her gaze, I saw it again, the same white point, high and motionless. I crouched beside her. She didn't bark or growl, just watched intently. Then she whimpered, backed up to the door, and started pawing frantically to get inside. I brought her in, locked the door, and watched from the bedroom window for over an hour. It never moved. Around 2 a.m., it remained exactly where it had been, silent and unchanging. The dot kept appearing and disappearing, catching my attention night after night. I found myself constantly scanning the sky, even during daylight hours. Satellite tracking apps offered no answers. The mysterious point defied all charts and expected paths. Late one night in May, I stood outside with my tea, watching the windswept pine branches against a cloudless sky. Something was different this time. 2 moons hung suspended, identical in size and brightness, one in its usual eastern pose, Aichin, the other near the southern tree line. Their synchronized stillness felt deliberate, almost calculated. Something about their presence unsettled me deeply. After that night, strange occurrences became more frequent. Low blue-tinted lights began flickering in the woods, appearing briefly before vanishing without trace. Clover, my dog, grew increasingly anxious, whimpering at the door and refusing her nighttime walks. I started taking her out earlier, before darkness fell. Around 3 a.m. one night, I heard what sounded like slow footsteps crunching on gravel near the barn. 4 distinct steps, then silence. I waited by the window with a flashlight, but saw nothing. Whatever made those sounds wasn't human. Mid-June marked the last time I saw the fixed star. It appeared higher in the sky than before. I took a single handheld photo, but something felt wrong, like I was intruding where I shouldn't. That night, the power flickered 3 times without explanation. My phone froze, unresponsive for nearly 10 minutes. Since then, I've stopped taking photos. I still catch myself checking, glancing out the kitchen window, stepping onto the porch on clear nights, but there's nothing to see, just emptiness. I was driving Heather's silver Honda Civic through her quiet neighborhood late at night. The air felt cool and damp, with a hint of wet leaves hanging in the early fall atmosphere. Streetlights were spaced far apart, casting pools of yellow-orange light on the empty road. Something strange started happening as I drove. The first streetlight flickered off just as I passed, going completely dark for a second before blinking back on. I initially brushed it off as a faulty bulb or wiring issue, but then it happened again and again. Every single streetlight I passed began doing the same thing, cutting out precisely as I approached and returning to normal right after I rolled by. I slowed the car, listening carefully. The slight rattling Heather had mentioned was barely audible, but present. The whole scenario felt increasingly bizarre. It was like the neighborhood was responding to my presence, though I knew that was impossible. No other cars or people were around, just me and these synchronizing lights. The dashboard radio started cutting in and out with static, which seemed to intensify near the flickering lights. When I tried calling Heather, the signal dropped immediately. My phone showed no bars. Another streetlight flickered off, continuing the unsettling pattern. I pulled over, trying to make sense of what was happening. The night felt increasingly surreal, with each streetlight seeming to react to my movement through the quiet suburban streets. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. I stepped out of the car, the night eerily still around me. Just ahead, a streetlight had gone dark, its absence creating a strange heaviness in the air. When I walked underneath, it flickered back to life, casting a warm glow that felt oddly deliberate. Something wasn't right. Driving slower now, I watched the streetlights intently. They seemed to follow a pattern, flickering just as I passed. Then the car's engine began to sputter, shuddering and almost stalling. A quick rev smoothed things out, but the rattling grew louder. The shadows along the street started behaving strangely. At the edge of one, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure that vanished the moment I tried to focus. I rationalized it as exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. Nearing Heather's house, the street became quieter. Her home sat on a secluded cul-de-sac, surrounded by dense woods. The streetlights here were more spread out, creating deeper pockets of darkness between them. As I approached the final light before her place, it went out completely. An unnatural silence descended. No night sounds broke through. The engine I did led roughly, the rattling seeming to originate from somewhere beneath the dashboard. Just as I reached to check the fuse box, the headlights flickered. Then I saw it, a faint, pulsing glow behind the trees. Subtle and slow, almost rhythmic, like something breathing. But the moment I tried to study it, it disappeared. My heart raced, and the car's interior suddenly felt unnaturally cold. Pulling into Heather's driveway, I cut the engine. The streetlight blinked back on. For a moment, I sat motionless, trying to make sense of the strange sequence of events. The rattling ceased instantly when the engine died. Heather's car needed work. I'd left a note about the noise and planned to return with fresh parts. After locking up, I walked to my truck parked down the street. Something caught my eye as I was leaving, a faint glow deep in the woods. No sound, no movement, just a slow, steady pulse. The next day, I took a closer look at Heather's car. I found a worn belt that likely caused the noise and replaced it. Everything seemed normal. The streetlights were fine during the day, steady and consistent. I tried to push the strange glow from my mind. But late at night, driving alone on quiet streets with old street lamps, something feels off. The lights seem to dim as I approach, and sometimes when I glance into the shadows, I catch that same slow, barely visible pulsing light watching from just out of sight. My overnight shift at the weather center in Duth was typical for mid-October. A cold night with a clear sky and a hint of frost when I arrived around 10 p.m. The building hummed softly with computer noise and keyboard tapping. My job involved monitoring radar, satellite data, and updating forecasts. Initially, everything appeared routine. Some leftover cloud cover hung over Lake Superior, but no significant storm activity. Around midnight, I pulled up the radar loop for the northwest quadrant near the Iron Range. Something unusual caught my attention. A single cloud cell hovering motionless just off the shore, over forests and lakes. At first, I assumed it was a system glitch or radar artifact. These things happen, but an hour later, the cloud remained in exactly the same spot. No movement, no change. I tracked the radar forward, 2 hours, 3 hours. The cloud stayed put, a perfect disk about 3 miles across, neither forming nor dissipating. I checked the wind data. Nothing. Wind speeds were near zero across the entire region. No nearby storms to explain the anomaly. The night shift started quietly. My monitors displayed satellite images of a cloud formation that defied explanation. Its shape was completely unlike anything I'd seen before. Smooth and flat like a disk with unnaturally sharp edges. Nothing like the typical fuzzy cloud boundaries. Thermal data showed the cloud cell was slightly cooler than surrounding air, which wasn't entirely unprecedented, but still strange. No lightning, no precipitation. I called my supervisor Karen over to take a look. She studied the screen intently for 10 minutes before dismissing it as likely a technical glitch. Something felt off. The computers hummed softly, monitor screens casting a dim glow. I couldn't shake the sense that something was just slightly wrong. Around 3 a.m., an inexplicable uneasiness crept over me. The cloud seemed almost watchful. Not in a human sense, but as if it didn't belong in the natural sky. I ran diagnostics on radar and satellite systems. Everything checked out perfectly. No maintenance, no updates, no potential interference that might create a false image. The disk remained stationary, but occasionally pulsed with a faint, subtle brightness. When I looked away and back, its edges seemed sharper, briefly almost glowing. I reached out to Jeff, another meteorologist on the East Coast, to see if their data showed anything similar. He confirmed not. Unusual on their end, which made sense given how localized this phenomenon was. I extended my shift, continuing to monitor the cloud. When the next team arrived, it remained exactly where it had been since midnight. Karen later reported that the satellite company found no interference or known anomalies. They were considering sending a plane for a visual check if the cloud persisted. I left work just before sunrise, the sky clear, except for that strange, silent disk hanging miles above the earth. The night it all began was when things got weird, and I still can't explain what happened. I'm Dan, living in a typical 2-story house in the Columbus suburbs. Nothing special, just enough yard for my dog, Rufio. He's a tough little terrier mix who's been my sidekick for 5 years. Usually fearless, loud noises never bother him, and he loves exploring every corner of the yard. But that Tuesday night in late spring was different. I'd been working late and got home around 11:30 p.m. The house was quiet, with just the usual fridge hum and air conditioner cycling on and off. Rufio greeted me at the door, tail wagging normally. I grabbed a beer, settled on the couch, and turned on the TV. 15 minutes in, a strange low hum emerged, unlike anything I'd heard before. It felt like the whole house was vibrating quietly, deep and steady. After about 10 seconds, it stopped completely. Rufio instantly froze. His ears went flat, and he bolted toward the basement door, which was odd because he typically hates that dark, cold, musty space. He scrambled down the steps and disappeared into the shadows. I followed, thinking he might have discovered a mouse. But when I reached the bottom, he was just standing by the furnace, staring intently at the wall as if something invisible was there. I called him, tried to coax him, but he remained transfixed. Days later, I noticed something equally strange in the sky. A cloud hung motionless against the lightning-filled backdrop, seemingly unaffected by the surrounding wind and weather. My border collie mix, Juno, kept staring out the window that morning, more twitchy than usual. I tried distracting her with walks and toys, but her attention remained fixed on the sky. The cloud lingered most of the day, slowly dissolving from its edges as the radar finally showed it breaking up late afternoon. By evening, it had vanished completely. I checked the data over the next couple of days, nothing similar anywhere else. Sometimes I still look up, wondering if it was just a weird weather anomaly or something entirely different. That cloud never made sense to me. Something about it didn't quite align with how clouds or anything natural typically behave. Night after night, something felt off in my basement. Rufio, usually so energetic, had become strangely withdrawn. He'd spend hours by the furnace, barely moving, ignoring my attempts to coax him away. Normally up and ready for a walk by 7 a.m., he now wouldn't even come upstairs until late afternoon. I worried he might be hurt or sick, but he seemed physically fine, just unusually quiet. When I tried to get him to leave his spot, he'd growl softly and back away, always returning to that same area near the furnace. I checked the basement repeatedly, finding no explanation for his behavior. No rodents, no strange smells, no drafts. Strange occurrences started happening around the house. Lights would flicker at odd hours, which I initially blamed on old wiring, but the timing felt peculiar, always coinciding with a low humming sound that emerged late at night. About 3 days after first hearing the hum, I was doing laundry when it returned, deeper and louder this time, almost pressing against my chest. Rufio barked once, low and uneasy, then raced back to his spot near the furnace. When I looked up, everything was quiet. The air felt different, thicker somehow. My skin prickled, and a dull headache began behind my eyes. I stepped outside for fresh air, calling Rufio to join me. He whined softly, hesitating before slowly climbing the stairs, staying close. In the following days, I noticed odd details in the basement. Faint scorch marks near the furnace, small patches where paint bubbled. A technician found no real cause during repairs. The mysterious hum continued, arriving every few nights around midnight, lasting 10 to 15 seconds. I tried recording it, but playback revealed only faint static, nothing like the actual sound. Rufio remained on edge, ears twitching, eyes darting to the corners, always watchful, always tense. One morning, I discovered the basement door wide open, certain I'd closed it the night before. Rufio had vanished. I searched the entire house, calling for him repeatedly. After a frantic half hour, I found him in the basement, sitting motionless by the furnace, staring intently at the wall. When I sat beside him to offer comfort, something caught my eye. In the dim light, a faint, almost translucent shimmer moved slowly across the wall, like a thin veil or heat wave. I blinked, and it disappeared. I rationalized it as a trick of light or shadow from the pipes. Rufio remained completely still, unblinking even when I crouched next to him. The basement felt unusually cold, with no detectable drafts. I began tracking the mysterious hum and Rufio's behavioral changes, noting the intervals were irregular, but typically 2 to 3 nights apart. Strange occurrences escalated. One night after the hum, my phone behaved erratically, screen dimming spontaneously, apps crashing, and GPS showing a non-existent location. The next morning, I discovered an inexplicable curved scratch on the basement wall near the furnace, unlike any tool in my possession. The sensation of being watched intensified. Sleep became difficult, and I'd wake frequently to check on Rufio, who now slept just outside the basement door instead of inside. Then came the night I heard deliberate, slow footsteps from the basement. My heart raced as I froze in bed. When I called Rufio, he didn't bark or investigate. Instead, he trembled at my feet. Gripping a baseball bat, I crept downstairs. The basement was pitch black, illuminated only by the furnace's pilot light. Nothing seemed amiss, but the low, deep hum returned, pressing against my skin. Suddenly, it stopped. Breathing heavily, I waited in complete silence before locking the basement door and retreating upstairs. Gradually, Rufio resumed his normal behavior. The hum disappeared for almost a week, and I hoped it was over. But then the basement door was open again. I started noticing changes in the basement. One morning before work, I discovered another scratch, deeper and more jagged this time. There were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. Worried, I began leaving the lights on and installed a camera to monitor the space. Most of the camera footage looked completely normal. Rufio would wander around, behaving like he always did. But one night, something caught my attention. A faint glow appeared in the corner of the frame, not like a reflection or lens flare, but a soft, shifting light almost resembling a ripple. Rufio didn't seem bothered, but watching the playback sent a chill through me. I immediately unplugged the camera. Sleep has been difficult since then. While Rufio has mostly returned to his old self, he still avoids that spot near the furnace, staying only briefly before moving away. I can't explain what's in the basement or what the strange hum means. Something definitely changed that night. In the quiet moments of the house, I hear a low vibration, barely perceptible, like a distant pulse. Yet when I go down to investigate, only the empty basement awaits me. My flight from Seattle to Minneapolis was typical at first. Stuck in the middle seat between a softly snoring man and a woman working on her laptop, I kept my window shade slightly open. The cabin was dark, with most passengers trying to rest. Hours into the flight, we cruised above a thick cloud layer that looked like a soft gray blanket stretching across the night sky. No moon was visible, just blackness above and an endless white sheet below. Occasional blinking seatbelt signs and overhead lights provided the only illumination. Then I saw something through the small window. Initially, I thought it was a cloud trick or the plane's wing moving, but this was different. Far beneath the clouds, a faint outline was moving. No lights, no glow, just a shape pacing or gliding across the cloud surface. The shape moved steadily in a straight line, paused, then continued. I blinked repeatedly, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. I nudged my seatmate, whispering, "Do you see that down there?" He mumbled incoherently and turned away. I'm Ethan, and I live just a couple miles from Dry Creek Canyon's edge. I head out there a lot, mostly for the quiet and the views. I'm no professional drone pilot, just a guy who likes to tinker and shoot landscape videos. On this late afternoon, things started feeling off while I was out flying my drone. My drone experience took a strange turn during a flight some time ago. I glanced over at the woman next to me on the plane, but she was focused on her screen with headphones on, so I just kept watching outside. The shape I saw was pale, almost like a soft silhouette, stretching about 20 feet long. It was hard to gauge the exact scale from that distance. Something about it reminded me of a figure walking upright, but elongated, like a weird shadow pacing quietly in the darkness. We were flying fast, and the shape moved steadily alongside us. Surprisingly, it didn't vanish behind the clouds as I expected. Instead, it stayed just below us, moving in a straight line, as if it knew we were there. The entire encounter lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Just as suddenly as it appeared, the shape slipped under the cloud cover and disappeared. I kept staring out the window, half expecting it to reappear, but nothing happened. The night sky returned to normal. No lights, no shapes. My heart raced a bit, but I wasn't exactly scared. More like weirded out. What was that thing? How had I seen it so clearly when no one else did? Maybe I was just tired, and my mind was playing tricks. When the flight attendant came by with water and snacks, I asked if anyone had reported seeing anything unusual. She just gave me a polite smile and said, "No, nothing unusual." The rest of the flight passed without incident, and we landed early morning. Later, I described the shape to some friends, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. No one had any idea what I was talking about. It wasn't a plane or helicopter. There were no lights or sounds from that distance. Not a bird or weather balloon either. I'm still unsure whether I was lucky enough to see something real or if my mind had stitched together random shadows and light in a weird way. Sometimes when I fly at night now, I catch myself glancing down, half hoping to see that pacing shape again. But it never comes back. It was a dry, warm day around 78 degrees with a gentle breeze rustling through the scrub oaks. I had my usual gear, the Phantom 4 Pro drone, a backpack with batteries and water, and my dog Bramble, a scruffy mutt with a thick reddish coat who's smart and always tags along. The drone was hovering above a cluster of jagged rocks, sunlight catching their edges perfectly. I was capturing footage for a simple Instagram video when something on the live feed caught my eye. About 500 feet below, nestled between 2 rock outcrops, was a circular depression carved into the stone, perfectly smooth, as if a giant metal bowl had been pressed into the canyon floor. I was certain this wasn't here during my recent satellite image check just a day or 2 earlier. Satellite images can be grainy, but this depression was about 30 feet across, large enough to be unmistakable. Zooming the camera in, I saw the edges were razor sharp, with no cracks or surrounding rubble. The surface inside was completely flat and smooth, unlike the rough canyon floor. A sense of unease crept over me. This didn't belong here. Dry Creek Canyon is composed of old granite and sandstone, shaped by water and wind over millions of years. No natural process could explain this peculiar formation. I decided to land the drone and hike closer. Bramble trotted ahead, sniffing bushes along the trail. The descent was rough, mostly loose gravel and dry brush. As the sun dipped low, shadows stretched across the rocks and an unusual quiet settled over the landscape. The air felt different, not humid, but somehow thicker and more dense. Bramble stopped, staring intently at the depression, her ears perked and a soft growl escaping her throat. When I tried to wave her off, she remained tense, refusing to come closer. Approaching the edge, I peered down into the mysterious formation. The rock surface was rough and weathered everywhere, except for this one spot. A perfect circle stretched about 28 feet across, its surface so smooth it almost seemed to reflect light like glass, but not wet or shiny, just impossibly polished. The depression ran about 3 feet deep, with no tool marks, no machinery tracks, and no debris inside. When I circled around, something felt off. I tried taking pictures with my phone, but the screen immediately glitched and flickered. The shadows behaved strangely too. While the rest of the canyon glowed with warm, fading sunlight, this circular area seemed to absorb light differently. The shadows didn't match the sun's position, creating an unsettling effect. A cold sensation crept through my chest, as if I'd stepped into a different realm, despite standing on the same rock. Bramble, my dog, had gone tense and alert. The air pressure felt heavy, almost oppressive. I didn't want to linger. As I backed away, the strange feeling began to dissipate. Bramble relaxed, returning to sniffing the surrounding brush. On my way back, I kept glancing at the sky. The sunset painted everything pink and orange, with birds circling overhead and the wind picking up. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by a person, but by something lurking in the shadows. Back at the car, I tried reviewing the footage. Every image of the depression was corrupted. Files wouldn't open, showing only static. Oddly, all other footage remained perfectly clear. Trees, cliffs, bramble running, everything except the circle. The next morning I returned early, hoping for clarity, but the depression had vanished. The rocks looked exactly as they always had, rough, cracked, weathered. No circle, no smooth surface. Satellite images from that morning and the previous day showed nothing unusual. I wanted to dismiss it as a trick of light or a camera glitch. But Bramble's reaction and that inexplicable sensation lingered, defying simple explanation. The power went out just after 9:30 p.m., right in the middle of the dinner hour. This wasn't a typical outage with a quick flicker and return of lights. It was a complete blackout that swallowed the entire neighborhood and town. I live in Maple Hollow, a quiet cluster of houses on the edge of the Missouri Ozarks, where darkness falls fast without streetlights or porch bulbs. I was sitting on my porch with Scout, my lean black lab with a white chest patch. He was unusually calm, which struck me as odd since he typically gets jumpy during power dips. We'd been watching weather radar on my phone when the screen suddenly went bland. At first, I thought it was just a phone glitch, but then I noticed Scout staring upward, ears perked and tail stiff. That's when I heard it, a low, grinding humming sound. It was steady and constant, unlike any mechanical noise from a generator or engine. The sound felt wrong, too smooth, too uniform. I looked up, but thick clouds obscured the sky. My phone went completely dead, no signal, no Wi-Fi. I tried calling my wife Clara, but the calls wouldn't connect. The neighborhood was eerily silent, except for that strange, omnipresent whirring sound. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. I grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the street. Neighbors emerged from their houses, holding candles and flashlights, their faces showing confusion and concern. Since that night, something has continued to nag at me. The strange occurrence wasn't just about the power outage. There was something more, something I can't quite explain. I've experienced other odd moments, particularly when returning to Dry Creek Canyon. During one of my visits, I noticed a peculiar light shift and strange behavior that defied explanation. I didn't share the story widely, knowing most people wouldn't believe me. I did send the drone footage to a tech-savvy friend, but even he couldn't explain the file corruption or why images from that specific location were unusable. I've returned to the canyon several times since. Sometimes I feel watched near that particular spot. My dog stays unusually close and refuses to wander. I keep thinking about the smooth, perfect circle in the rock, how it appeared suddenly and vanished just as quickly. I can't explain what it was. Perhaps it was some unknown natural formation, or maybe something entirely different. All I know is that it existed, and it shouldn't have. We were standing outside, drawn by an eerie silence and a strange noise overhead. Our neighborhood sits near some woods with a big hill behind it. The sound seemed to be coming from up there, and I wondered if some new equipment might be responsible, maybe a cell tower or construction site. But nothing had been built recently, and the complete signal blackout didn't make sense. Normally, a tower would improve signal strength, not eliminate it entirely. Hank, one of our older neighbors, pointed upward and drew our attention to a faint, pulsing glow between the clouds. It wasn't steady like typical aircraft lights. Instead, it flickered on and off in irregular intervals, almost like a heartbeat. Scout, our dog, grew tense and started growling low in his throat. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. More neighbors began gathering outside, drawn by the power outage and the unsettling atmosphere. Minutes passed with no change. No radio crackles, no emergency sirens, no communication channels active. When I tried to start my car, nothing happened. The entire area remained locked in an unnatural quiet, broken only by that persistent, strange noise. Without warning, the sky's glow transformed. A precise line of white, unblinking lights began moving slowly and silently above the tree line. Their formation was too uniform, as if moving in perfect synchronization. People started whispering and attempting to use their phones, but screens remained dark. Some tried pointing flashlights upward, but the lights continued drifting overhead. Clara called from inside the house about 20 minutes later, her voice shaky. She reported the entire town was dark, the power grid completely down, and the noise was omnipresent. She asked if she should come outside, but I told her to stay put, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Scout became increasingly agitated, pacing and constantly scanning the sky. Then, as the lights passed over the hill and disappeared from view, the humming abruptly stopped. No gradual fade, just instant silence. Moments later, power began returning, flickering unevenly at first, with street lights and house lights slowly coming back to life. Phones suddenly buzzed alive with notifications and calls. Back inside, I sat down, feeling uneasy. When the signal returned, I checked online news reports. Small towns nearby had experienced the same blackout and strange noise. Some mentioned odd lights, but no clear explanation emerged. The next day, a crew arrived on the hill, claiming to investigate a power grid issue. They avoided discussing the lights or noise. Asking around proved futile. Those who witnessed the event seemed hesitant, as if waiting or avoiding attention. Scout remained fixated on the sky for days afterward. I haven't seen those lights since. The worry has subsided. Yet on quiet nights, when the wind blows just right, a soft, steady hum like distant metal grinding seems to echo in the background. Hiking has been my passion for years, mostly solo. A few months back, my friend Jamie, a more experienced trail enthusiast who often drags me to challenging Cascade routes, joined me. We chose the Tolt Pipeline Trail near Carnation, Washington. It's not extremely difficult, but the dense forest and intersecting paths can be tricky. We started late morning, with sunlight breaking through a light fog. The temperature was perfect, cool but comfortable. Jamie brought Echo, his lean black lab mix, who's well-trained and stays close while maintaining an exploratory spirit. I relied on my hiking app's GPS, not being particularly skilled with traditional navigation. Our conversation meandered through typical hiking banter, work stress, silly jokes. The trail was damp, leaves slick with dew, the air rich with wet earth and pine scents. 2 hours in, we encountered an unfamiliar fork. Jamie noted the trail seemed rerouted. We chose the left path, narrower and less traveled. Within minutes, the route became confusing. The path twisted unexpectedly, and overgrowth obscured our view. After about 10 minutes, something felt distinctly wrong. We paused, surveying our surroundings. No markers, no trail signs, and the path had grown increasingly indistinct. We traveled further than expected when Echo started acting strange. Her quiet tension and constant scanning of our surroundings put us on edge. Low-lying fog began rolling in, swallowing trees and muffling every sound until our voices seemed distant even when we shouted. Deciding to turn back, I pulled up my phone's GPS. What I saw made no sense. Instead of our twisting trail, the screen showed a perfectly straight line cutting directly through the forest, as if someone had drawn a shortcut through solid trees and brush. This path bore no resemblance to the terrain around us. Jamie looked over, his raised eyebrows matching my confusion. "That can't be right," he muttered. I double-checked with another navigation app. The impossible straight line appeared again. We tried following the digital path, pushing through thick undergrowth where a trail should have been. Nothing. Just dense trees and shrubs blocking our way. After a few futile minutes, we retreated to the fork, where it was still visible through the fog. Echo remained unsettled, constantly looking behind us. Her ears twitched, alert to something we couldn't hear. Only wind and occasional bird calls broke the silence when we called out. Once we returned to the original fork and clearer air, the GPS returned to normal. The strange straight line vanished completely, replaced by the trail's gentle curve through the trees. We completed our hike, but the experience haunted me. The sudden fog, the impossible GPS route, Echo's bizarre behavior, it all felt like a momentary glitch in reality. The day after, I scoured online hiking forums, searching for similar reports. Nothing. The trail showed no recorded changes for months. I haven't returned since, not with Jamie or Echo. I still hike other trails, but that day remains an unexplained mystery. A moment where the forest seemed to shift, where the familiar path simply disappeared, leaving only questions in its wake. Later that night, I reviewed the dashcam footage. Something about the drive felt different, though I couldn't quite explain why. The dashcam captured everything that night. The slow rhythm of my taillights, scattered glimmers from distant cabins, and the road curving through the hills. I was driving home from a late shift at the mill, just past midnight, on a mostly empty highway in northern Idaho. Tall pine trees surrounded the two-lane stretch, disappearing into the dark sky. The weather was clear and dry, cold enough that my breath fogged the car windows. A few minutes into the drive, something caught my attention. Headlights appeared behind me, uncomfortably close. I'm not one to speed, especially at night, so this tight tailgating stood out. At first, I thought it might be a coworker or neighbor taking a shortcut. The headlights stayed about 2 car lengths behind, following each curve precisely. When I slowed down, the car matched my pace exactly. I pulled into a rest stop, and the headlights continued but didn't stop. The car just sat there in the dark on the highway. Engine off, no movement. The rest stop was empty and quiet, with only a faint wind rustling through the trees. My phone sat on the passenger seat with barely half a bar of signal. I didn't want to overthink the situation. After a few minutes, I eased back onto the highway. The car behind me started moving again, its headlights steady in my rearview mirror. Then something strange happened. The headlights, which had been fixed on my tail for about 5 minutes, suddenly shifted upward. They flickered and stretched vertically, moving almost impossibly, not like a mechanical motion, but more like something floating. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of light or a reflection from the trees. But the dashcam footage told a different story. The headlights lifted off the road, rising smoothly until they were just a small glow against the stars. And then, just like that, they vanished. I wish I hadn't looked. The summer I worked the night shift at East Point Lighthouse was unlike any other. This wasn't some automated setup where you just check in occasionally. It was the real deal. Me, the ancient rotating beam, and the foghorn, all working in sync to slice through the thick coastal mist. The fog that week was heavy, transforming the entire island into a ghostly landscape. I'd been maintaining the lighthouse for about 3 months, and it was typically quiet work. Fishing boats would occasionally pass, and crows would scream from the cliffs, but nothing much happened. The island was tiny, barely a mile across, and at night the fog would close in tight. Normally the lighthouse beam would just catch the tops of waves or a distant buoy. But that night felt different. Weeks later, driving home, something impossible happened. The headlights behind me simply vanished. No fade, no flicker, just gone. The rest of the footage showed nothing. No cars, no lights, no sounds. I rewound and watched frame by frame, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. I considered normal explanations, a helicopter landing, a drone, a military test, but nothing fit. No noise, no flashing lights, no radio chatter on my scanner app. When I told my buddy Will about it over beers, he laughed it off, suggesting I was overtired or dreaming. But I knew what I'd seen. Every time I checked the dash cam, those headlights were there, rising slowly like they were climbing a ladder to the sky. What disturbed me most was how ordinary everything else looked. The trees, the road, the stars. It was as if the world was perfectly normal, except for that one impossible moment. I'm not sure why I did. It stopped, or call the police that night. Part of me was frozen, my brain unwilling to process what was happening. It felt strange, like being watched by something calm, yet utterly inhuman. I've driven that stretch many times since, and nothing like it has ever repeated. The road remains quiet and dark, nothing out of place. Yet sometimes when driving at night, I half expect to see those headlights creeping up behind me. They never do. The footage remains stored on my laptop, proof of a moment I can't explain, but can't unsee. Hours into my shift, the lighthouse felt like the loneliest place on earth. The only sounds were Juno's soft breathing at my feet and the occasional distant cry of a seagull lost in the fog. My scruffy companion was usually alert, but today she was content to doze while I kept watch. Something caught my eye as the lighthouse beam swept across the horizon. At first glance, it looked like a boat, but something was off. This shape didn't move, not even a twitch. It hung suspended in the thick white mist about a quarter-mile out, completely motionless. Every 20 seconds, the light passed over it. Each time, the dark shape remained exactly the same. No blinking lights, no movement, just a solid, silent presence. I tried reaching out, radio, phone, but nothing worked. No Coast Guard, no signal, just dead silence. Juno suddenly perked up. Her ears twitched, and a low growl rumbled from her throat as she stared out the window alongside me. That's when I noticed the absolute stillness. No waves, no wind, no seagulls. The silence was so complete it felt almost deliberate. Binoculars revealed nothing. The fog seemed to wrap around the object, thick and protective, almost like it was intentionally blocking my view. A solid black silhouette, perfectly still, with no reflection. I checked the lighthouse mechanism. Everything worked perfectly. The beam rotated every 10 seconds, and each time, the shape appeared exactly where it had been. A strange sensation crept over me. I felt watched, not just by the mysterious object, but by the entire island. The fog itself seemed to be observing me. Juno stayed close, growling softly but not barking. I tried to dismiss it as imagination playing tricks in the darkness. I stepped outside onto the balcony, pulling my coat tight. The fog was so dense I couldn't see the water. Complete silence surrounded me, broken only by the soft clink of something in the distance. The shape remained, unchanging, a dark mystery suspended between sea and sky. The night shift at the small grocery store on the edge of town was always quiet. I'm Jesse, and for about 6 months I'd been working these late hours in a place that sees more shadows than customers after 11 p.m. The parking lot was big, but mostly empty, with around 20 spots, flickering streetlights, and a chain-link fence separating us from an abandoned lot next door. I'd never believed in anything out of the ordinary. No ghosts, no aliens, nothing supernatural. But that night changed everything. I was doing my usual routine, clocking in around 10 p.m., stocking shelves, checking cameras, waiting for morning. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional stray cat or drifting stranger. Then something happened that I couldn't explain. Far out beyond the fog line, an object hung motionless, a dark mass that didn't reflect light and seemed to disturb nothing around it. I went back inside and tried every radio frequency, getting only static. Suddenly, a faint whisper crackled through, vanishing before I could understand it. Juno, my dog, jumped and barked, running to the door. When I opened it, thick fog obscured everything. No sign of anything, just silence. I watched that spot all night. The lighthouse beam rotated every 10 seconds, cutting through the mist. The shape remained, never moving, never blinking. At dawn, the fog lifted. The object slowly faded and disappeared completely. The next day, I checked with the Coast Guard. No reports of vessels or aircraft in the area. Satellite images showed nothing unusual, just a blank patch of sea. Since then, I've kept watch every night. Sometimes I glimpse a shadow far out, but it's never the same. Juno stays close during foggy nights, her quiet growl steady as she watches the window. I can't explain what I saw. It wasn't any boat or plane I've ever encountered. It was something waiting just beyond the world's edge, where light can't reach. The night was cold and sharp, the kind of dry October evening that makes your breath cloud up when you step outside. I was finishing my break around midnight, staring out the front window of the store. Something caught my eye, a figure standing motionless by the parking lot fence. At first, it seemed like someone might be waiting for a friend, but something felt wrong. This person wasn't moving at all. No shifting weight, no looking around, just completely still, like a statue carved from darkness. They were tall, wearing dark clothes that blended into the night, with a hood hiding their face. No car, no backpack, nothing to suggest they were simply waiting. I blinked and looked away for a second, then back. The figure remained exactly the same. Using the store's radio, I called security. "Hey, can you check the parking lot?" "There's someone standing by the fence," I told Mike, who said he'd be there in a few minutes. My eyes stayed locked on that corner. Minutes passed. The figure didn't move an inch. No blinking, no shifting, no indication they were aware of me watching. A strange feeling crept over me, a cold, heavy pressure that made the air feel different. It wasn't just the temperature dropping. Something about the night seemed to thicken around this mysterious figure. When Mike arrived in the security car, his headlights swept across the lot. I expected the figure to run or at least move, but they remained perfectly still. Mike got out, radioed back, and said, "No one here," sounding confused. He looked right where I'd seen the figure, but found nothing. I insisted I'd been looking directly at them, but when I glanced back through the window, they were gone. Just like that, one moment frozen in place, the next moment vanished. It happened so fast, like the figure had melted into the darkness. I stepped outside to look, but there was no sign anyone had been there. No footprints, no trash, nothing. Mike shrugged it off, suggesting it was a trick of the light or my imagination. I didn't argue. We both went back to our work, but the memory of that motionless figure stayed with me. During my night shifts, something strange started happening in the parking lot. At first, I thought I was just tired, but the details became impossible to ignore. Every time I glanced out the window, there was this figure standing motionless by the fence. I checked the security cameras, expecting to find some evidence. Mike confirmed they were working perfectly, but not a single frame showed anything unusual. The footage was just blank asphalt and shadows, no matter how carefully I rewound and watched. The next night, I stayed extra alert. Around midnight, the figure was back in the exact same spot, completely still. No movement, no blinking. When I called security, Mike promised to come quickly. Something weird happened when he arrived. The figure vanished the moment Mike stepped out and radioed me. This wasn't my imagination. Over the following weeks, the encounters became more frequent and unsettling. The figure always appeared in the same place, standing perfectly motionless for hours. Sometimes the street lamp light would hit them strangely, making their edges look too sharp. Their shadow seemed slightly off, not matching their shape exactly. I'd catch flickery movements at the edge of my vision, but when I turned to look directly, nothing was there. A strange pressure in the air grew heavier with each encounter. When I mentioned it to Puit, the store manager, he joked it might be an old mannequin. But I knew better. Mannequins don't stand outside fenced parking lots for hours and then disappear when someone approaches. Eventually, the figure's appearances became less frequent, but an uneasy feeling remained. I started taking extra precautions, locking doors early, checking windows, and making sure my dog Poppy was inside before leaving. Once, I thought I saw a shadow flicker in my rearview mirror, but when I looked back, the lot was empty. That night shift, the mysterious figure, and its unexplained disappearances, none of it made sense. Just a still shape in the darkness, watching or waiting for something I couldn't understand. Near Cape Falcon, Oregon, the coastline stretches quiet and rocky, a landscape I know like the back of my hand. I'm Eli, a fisherman who spent years navigating these waters. That morning started differently, though. My old aluminum boat, the Seafarer, was loaded and ready with Scout, my part-lab mutt, curled up behind me as we set out around 5 a.m. The sky hung gray and heavy, waiting to break into dawn. I was headed to a small cove tucked behind a wind-blocking bluff, a spot I'd fished before but hadn't visited recently. Everything seemed normal until I glanced down at the compass near the helm. The needle was spinning wildly, darting around instead of pointing north, something that made no sense. I knew this compass. We'd been through years of trips together, and it had always been reliable. Shaking it didn't help. The needle kept jerking erratically, and Scout seemed on edge too, his ears twitching as he stared intently at the water. This wasn't just a minor equipment issue. The cove should have been free from magnetic interference. Granite rocks surrounded us, and no power lines were nearby. My GPS worked perfectly, showing our exact position. Every time I approached the cove, the compass went haywire. It wasn't a brief glitch, but a consistent, unsettling phenomenon. I'd been meaning to replace the compass, but money was tight. So I continued fishing, watching the instrument, and noting Scout's unusual stillness. Later that morning, while checking traps near the cove's edge, I realized something else was off. The water was unnaturally still. No birds called, no fish splashed, no wind rustled the bluff's trees. The cove felt suspended in an eerie, complete silence. Scout remained frozen, staring out over the water as if waiting for something I couldn't see. The cove had always felt off, but that day it became something more than just a feeling. Scout, my dog, was staring intently toward the opposite shore, hackles raised. Following his gaze, I spotted a figure standing near some driftwood at the far edge of the cove. Tall, thin, wearing a dark jacket and hat, the man was completely motionless, just staring back at me. When I blinked, he vanished. No footprints, no trace he'd ever been there. Scout growled and refused to go near that side of the cove. Later that afternoon, I mentioned this strange encounter to Tom, a veteran fisherman who knew these waters better than anyone. He listened carefully as I described the odd figure and my spinning compass. Tom frowned and shared local stories about the cove, tales of strange occurrences and whispers of a curse. He'd never believed them himself, and neither had I. I'm not one for supernatural nonsense, but something was different this time. The compass kept spinning whenever I approached, and Scout remained unusually jumpy. One evening, I decided to investigate. After dark, I stayed on the boat, sitting under a faint lantern glow and watching the water. Around 10 p.m., the wind died complet. Telly and fog began rolling in, low and thick, swallowing the entire cove. The compass needle started spinning again, first slowly, then faster. Soft, rhythmic tapping sounds came from the hull. Scout growled and perked up, but the fog obscured everything. I shouted out, but heard nothing in return. Then, as suddenly as it started, the tapping stopped. The compass needle steadied, pointing directly north. Through the thickest part of the fog, I glimpsed something strange. A dim light moving just beneath the water's surface, unlike any boat or buoy. Scout whimpered and crawled into my lap. The atmosphere felt oppressive, as if something was watching from beneath the waves. The next morning, I discovered inexplicable marks on the boat's hull, long, thin scratches that looked like claw marks, with no reasonable explanation. When I showed Tom, he just shook his head. "That place has always been weird," he said. "Since then, I've avoided the cove, sticking to familiar waters where my compass works normally. But on dark nights, I can't help glancing back, knowing something unnatural lurks there, something I can't explain or understand." The city fell silent just after 8 p.m. Its usual evening buzz suddenly cut short. In my Redford Heights apartment, nestled among old brick buildings and narrow streets, darkness descended without warning. No flickering, no gradual dimming, just an abrupt halt to everything. My terrier mix, Poppy, reacted differently than she would during a storm. Instead of her typical nervous behavior, she stood frozen, ears alert, staring intently out the window. The street below was transformed. No lights, no neon signs, no background traffic noise. Complete stillness. I reached for my phone, hoping to get some information, but quickly realized the entire building was powerless. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal. The city seemed to have pressed pause on itself. A cool, humid breeze drifted through the cracked window, carrying an unusual silence. Normally, this time of evening would be filled with sirens, car horns, or distant conversations. Now, nothing. 15 minutes into the blackout, the tapping began, soft, rhythmic, like gentle fingers drumming against glass. I initially thought Poppy was scratching, but she remained motionless on the floor, wide-eyed. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 3 more. Outside, I scanned the street, empty, no people, no movement among the parked cars and darkened storefronts. The tapping continued, steady but not close. I checked every window in the apartment. Nothing. My shout down to the street returned only an echo. A call to my friend Laya on the landline revealed something strange. She confirmed the citywide power outage and, remarkably, the same mysterious tapping. No one was outside in her area either. Over the next hour, the rhythmic sound persisted, a consistent pattern reminiscent of an unknown code, repeating with mechanical precision. The city was dark and quiet during the blackout, with an unsettling stillness that seemed to hold its breath. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, a precise pattern that echoed through my apartment. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from next door or across the hall, but whenever I looked, nothing was there. Poppy, my dog, stayed close, her body tense and her eyes constantly scanning the windows. The tapping didn't make sense. No animal could create such a rhythmic sound, and the eerie silence outside only intensified the mystery. At one point, I thought I heard faint whispers, but pressing my ear to the glass revealed only silence. When the power finally returned around 11 p.m., the tapping stopped abruptly. Checking the street, I found no signs of anyone. Neighbors shared similar experiences, describing a feeling of being watched during the blackout, as if something was waiting just outside. Poppy changed after that night. He avoids the windows after dark, and I keep the curtains drawn tight. What we experienced was inexplicable. Everyone I spoke with had the same story. No one saw anything, yet the tapping was undeniably real, happening simultaneously across the city. My name's Jesse, and this wasn't my first strange encounter. I was camping alone near Mount Hood, seeking solitude with just my gear and Luna, my border collie mix. We were about a mile off the main trail, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by firs and alders. That night, I woke to an unsettling sensation. My tent zipper was moving, but from the inside, the slider being pulled down slowly and deliberately. Heart racing, I sat up. By the time I looked, the zipper was already halfway down. The cool, crisp night air of early fall filled the tent, and a faint rustling came from outside. Luna, usually alert, remained curled at my feet. The tent door was open halfway, caught in the beam of my flashlight. Nothing moved outside, just shadows stretching between trees. Luna sat calmly beside me, ears perked. I called her name softly. Through the tent window, I noticed something strange, a perfectly round patch of grass, scorched like someone had pressed a hot iron against it. About the size of a dinner plate, it didn't smell like a campfire or cigarette. Instead, the scent was sharp and faintly metallic, almost chemical. A weird feeling pulled at my chest, a warning. Unzipping the tent completely, I stepped outside. Luna immediately went to the burned spot, sniffing it intently. The clearing was quiet. My fire pit remained cold and untouched, gear exactly where I'd left it. No footprints, no signs of anyone else. My watch read 2:17 a.m. Luna stayed fixated on the scorched patch, tail motionless. She didn't bark or growl, just stared. I swept my flashlight between the trees, finding nothing unusual, but something felt off. The silence was too complete. No crickets, no wind, no distant owls. It was like the forest was holding its breath. I zipped the tent closed, locking it from the inside. The feeling of being watched wouldn't leave. Luna remained alert beside me. Sleep was impossible. At dawn, the burned patch looked unchanged. Using a stick, I poked it carefully. The ground underneath was warm but cooling, as if recently heated. I packed up early, Luna quiet during our hike back. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting something to follow. Nothing ever did. Since that night, I've camped many times, but that moment stays with me. I was working the night shift at Pine Row Industrial, a cluster of old warehouses about 15 miles outside Duth. My job was security, which meant watching cameras and walking the perimeter 3 nights a week. Easy work, but not exciting. This particular night was brutally cold. Around 2:30 a.m., the temperature had dropped to -15 with wind chill. A storm 2 days earlier had packed the snow hard, and the field behind the northern fence was frozen solid. It stretched about 400 yards, surrounded by a chain-link fence with nothing but brush and rusted machinery beyond. In the office, we had a solid setup. 12 monitors, half showing regular camera feeds and the others infrared, mostly for tracking wildlife or checking heat loss near loading bays. I was sitting there, eating a half-stale cinnamon roll from the vending machine, watching the feeds cycle through. Everything was quiet. A few deer had wandered through around midnight, but nothing unusual. Then something on the north infrared feed caught my attention. Movement. 3 heat signatures were coming from the tree line beyond the fence. They were distinctly humanoid, tall, upright, walking smoothly across the uneven, icy ground. No hesitation, no slipping. I immediately checked the matching regular camera feed. Nothing. The area was well lit by moonlight, but the field appeared completely empty. Back to infrared, the three figures were still there, spaced about 6 feet apart. No visible gear, no flashlights, no reflective clothing. The thermal imaging showed them bright white against the cold black background. They were warm, really warm. I zoomed in with the camera. The shapes didn't look bundled up for the cold. No puffy coats, no visible hats. Just those three figures moving steadily across the frozen field. To this day, I haven't seen anything like that night again. The only trace was a scorched grass patch outside my tent, a weird round burn mark with no other evidence of what happened. I was watching camera 3 when something caught my eye. The figures moving across the field looked odd, tall, smooth outlines with stiff shoulders and weirdly round heads. Nothing about them seemed right. So I radioed Mike, who was doing rounds in the east building. He took his time getting back to the office, which wasn't unusual. When he arrived, stomping snow off his boots, I pointed to the screen. They'd been walking since 2:33, moving steadily across the field, about 100 yards from the fence. I toggled the split screen, infrared on the left, regular view on the right. Mike stared in disbelief. On the right camera, nothing. But the infrared showed 3 distinct heat signatures. "That's not possible," he muttered. I'd already checked the thermal calibrations earlier that night, and everything seemed normal. We'd even seen deer clearly on both feeds just hours before. The figures kept moving with an unnervingly consistent pace. No slowing down, no looking around. I checked the fence camera directly above their path, no movement visible. Yet the infrared continued to track their approach. I called our supervisor, Paul, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail explaining the strange situation. Then I contacted local non-emergency dispatch to ask if anyone had reported people on the property. Nothing. At 2:44 a.m., the first figure reached the fence. The regular camera showed only snow, brush, and darkness. On infrared, the heat shape stopped directly in front of the chain link. The other 2 figures halted about 6 feet behind, perfectly still. Mike whispered something I missed. As I zoomed in, the white silhouettes remained featureless. But then something truly bizarre happened. The chain link itself began to warm up. Literally. The metal was heating up where the first figure stood. The infrared camera showed a faint gray glow where something stood, as if heating up the area. Slowly, the warmth spread sideways across the horizontal length of the fence, seeming to raise the metal's temperature just by being near it. The regular camera revealed nothing unusual, no shadows, no distortion. At 2:47 a.m., a second figure joined the first. They stood shoulder to shoulder, and the same heating effect occurred. The metal in front of them warmed evenly, as if heated from within, without fire or melting. We both instinctively backed away from the monitor. A third figure began moving differently, walking along the inside perimeter of the fence line to the west. The other 2 remained stationary, facing forward. We switched cameras to track its movement. After about 60 yards, it stopped at a rarely used maintenance access gate, standing there as if waiting. The first 2 figures stayed at the main fence, motionless. Mike asked if he should investigate in person, but I immediately said no. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't explain why. We continued watching. At 2:53 a.m., all 3 figures turned simultaneously. They pivoted away from the fence and walked back toward the tree line with a steady, unhurried pace, never looking back. Within 5 minutes, they had disappeared from view. The fence cooled down naturally behind them. We rewound the footage, recorded the screen, and saved the clips. At 3:08, I calling Paul again, and this time he answered. I described what we'd seen and mentioned we had video evidence. He asked me to email it and said he'd review it in the morning. The next night, the footage vanished. Not corrupted, simply missing. We checked every possible location, timestamp folder, backup drive, but found nothing. Every other hour of footage remained intact, except for the window between 2:30 and 3:10 a.m. Mike and I didn't discuss the incident much afterward. He transferred to day shifts 3 weeks later, while I remained on nights. I still check that fence during every shift, but I've never seen those shapes again. Out near Timber Ridge, Oregon, a small logging town where everyone knows each other, I'm Ben, a local who works at the mill. One late night, I was driving home on a highway that cuts through nothing but dense forest for miles, just pine trees and darkness on both sides. The road was empty and smooth, and despite being tired, I was focused on getting home quickly. It was past 10 p.m., and the highway was practically deserted. About 20 miles out of town, something strange happened. The radio suddenly went silent, cutting off mid-song like someone had pressed the off button. I tried adjusting the dial, switching between AM, FM, and even the weather channel, but nothing worked. The radio screen was completely dark. That's when I first noticed the shadow. A perfectly round black disc seemed to float above my car, despite the clear sky filled with stars. No clouds, no birds, no aircraft, just an unexplained darkness passing overhead. I pulled over at a turnout, looking around. There were no tall trees or structures that could have cast such a shadow. Scout, my dog riding shotgun, started growling low in his throat. The feeling of being watched was intense. I scanned the surroundings, but nothing moved. Only the wind, rustling through the pine trees, broke the silence. Then, as suddenly as it had disappeared, the radio turned back on, but instead of music, there was only static. Not just random noise, but a kind of deliberate scrambled signal that felt almost like a message. I tried to shake off the unease, telling Scout to calm down, and continued driving. But I couldn't stop checking the rearview mirror and glancing at the sky. For a few minutes, everything seemed normal. Then it happened again. The same perfectly round shadow passed over the car, and the radio cut out. This sequence repeated 3 more times before I reached the town's edge. Each time, the shadow moved smoothly, hovering just above the treetops. The radio would die, then return with nothing but static. When I finally pulled into my driveway, Scout was still on edge, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual had followed me home. Last October, we hiked Cranberry Ridge, one of those local trails nobody really uses. Me and Nolan, with his dog Poppy, a wiry terrier mix with endless energy, started around 3:30. The afternoon was warm enough to hike without a jacket, the air cool but not cold. Poppy darted around us, nose down and tail up, constantly circling back to check we were following. Nolan had a flask, and we passed it back and forth as we walked. The trail was quiet, barely maintained, just a gravel pull-off and a path winding through a few hills. We reached our favorite spot near the top around 5, where the trees opened just enough to see the western ridge line and valley. The sun hit the far ridge perfectly, casting golden light on the treetops. We sat on a big flat rock, not talking much. I pulled out trail mix, Nolan lit a cigarette, and Poppy chased something in the brush, coming back with a burr stuck to her face. That's when Nolan stopped mid-sentence about an argument with his sister. He was squinting at something above the tree line, about 100 yards to our left. When he pointed, I looked and nodded. Dee saw it too. A strange reflective thing like a warped sheet of chrome. It was impossibly high, larger than a compact car, hovering partially hidden between upper branches. Not moving, just sitting there like a weird mirror. The rest of the hike, I couldn't shake the feeling something was watching us. Later, driving home, that sense of being followed grew stronger. I jumped out of my car and bolted inside, locking the doors. I haven't driven that highway late at night since. I stood there, watching something that looked like a smooth blob, but it caught sunlight in a strange way. It seemed to flicker, almost rippling, despite the complete stillness around us. This wasn't drifting like a weather balloon or debris. It hung motionless, suspended too high to be attached to anything visible. The forest felt different. No birds anywhere. The air seemed frozen, disconnected from the surrounding woodland. Nolan tried using his phone to zoom in, but branches and glare made focusing impossible. We just watched, trying to make sense of this strange object for several minutes. Poppy's reaction broke the silence. Her bark was different, deeper, more aggressive than usual. She faced the object, low to the ground, her tail rigid and tense. When we attempted to calm her, she remained transfixed, refusing to look away. Something held us back from approaching, an unspoken mutual hesitation. "Let's come back tomorrow with binoculars," Nolan suggested. We retreated to the truck, discussing the encounter like kids trying to rationalize a scary experience. We speculated about possible explanations: trash, glare, maybe a drone or weather station. But I knew what I'd seen, something hovering, composed of material entirely unfamiliar to me. The next day, we returned around noon. Nolan brought binoculars, and I packed my old DSLR with a zoom lens. Poppy was already agitated, whining and pacing before we even left the vehicle. At the overlook, everything looked different. 30 trees in the object's direction were completely bare, their branches dry and brittle as if struck by extreme cold or heat. No leaves had simply fallen. These were stripped, lifeless. No scorch marks, just dead vegetation. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects. Nolan scanned the treetops with binoculars while I took photographs. But now, only empty space remained where the mysterious object had been. We ventured closer, walking about 50 yards into the dead zone. The ground felt strange, not soft, but oddly loose, as if something fundamental had changed. The forest felt strange from the moment we arrived. We'd been planning this weekend getaway for months, just me and Clara escaping the city. Something was off right away. The soil looked disturbed, packed down in an unnatural way, and the trees made an eerie sound, creaking in the wind while everything else remained completely still. I touched one of the tree trunks and felt a weird vibration, like standing near an electrical transformer. It was faint, but steady. I didn't mention it, thinking I was just imagining things. Nolan was focused on his binoculars, scanning the area intently. Suddenly, he stopped and handed me the binoculars. "The tops are all sheared off," he said. When I looked up, I saw exactly what he meant. 10 or 12 trees had their upper sections cleanly removed, not jagged or splintered like storm damage, but smooth, almost surgical cuts. It was like someone had precisely sliced off the tops and lifted them away. We stood there, unsure what to do. There was nothing to collect or report. No signs of human activity, no crash debris, just an unnatural silence broken by Poppy's low, persistent growl. When we returned to the trailhead, she refused to move past a certain point. We had to carry her to the truck. Later that night, Nolan texted about his phone's compass app acting straw, nearly, constantly spinning when he stood in that area. He'd initially thought it was just a glitch and hadn't mentioned it earlier. I tried the same thing days later, and my compass simply froze. The photos I took looked mostly normal, but something was off. The colors in that forest section had a washed-out gray-blue tint. A photographer friend suggested the camera sensor might have been confused by the lack of contrast, but the other shots from that day looked fine. We haven't returned since. Sometimes I drive past the trailhead, but never stop. I asked around, park rangers, a hiking blogger, even a local birding club member, but no one knew anything about the area's unusual defoliation. County records were silent too. Nolan suggests we should go back with a drone. I keep saying maybe, but I'm not really interested. And he hasn't pushed. I think he understands I don't want to return. We were camping in the San Gabriel Mountains, just far enough from Los Angeles to feel like we'd escaped the city completely. Clara, her dog Rufus, and I had arrived late Saturday afternoon. The air was dry but cool, with that crisp feeling that only becomes noticeable after sunset. Finding a clearing about a half-mile off the main trail, we set up the tent and started a small fire. Rufus was everywhere at once, sniffing every bush and rock like he was on a grand adventure. The first night seemed completely normal, just the usual campfire sounds and occasional rustling in the brush. We were sharing a cheap bottle of red wine, chatting about work and random things while Rufus curled up between us. I remember thinking this was exactly the peaceful weekend I needed. Then, around 10:30 p.m., everything changed. Clara grabbed my arm and pointed toward a ridge about 2 miles east. A bright orange glow like a fireball was falling behind the trees. Initially, I thought it might be a plane on fire or a meteorite. But this was different, larger and slower, moving down the slope with an intense light that cast sharp shadows across the treetops. We sat completely still. Rufus growled softly, his fur bristling as he stared in the same direction. The fireball disappeared behind the ridge and didn't return. After about 5 minutes, everything went dark and silent. No smoke, no explosion, nothing. We tried to rationalize it, maybe an atmospheric anomaly or a distant wildfire. But neither of us slept much that night. I kept checking the ridge every hour, seeing nothing. The next morning was clear and bright, with the air smelling of pine and dry earth. We decided to hike to the spot where we'd seen the fireball land. It was a 3-mile trek through jagged boulders and thick brush, with Rufus leading the way. Rufus was on edge the entire hike. His ears were pricked, and he kept looking back over his shoulder as if something was trailing us. Clara had lost her usual easy smile, glancing around nervously. When we reached the far side of the ridge, nothing seemed out of place. No crater, no debris, but a circular patch of ground about 15 feet across caught our attention. The grass and underbrush inside were completely scorched black, yet no burnt wood or trees surrounded it. No lingering smoke smell. It looked like a giant blowtorch had targeted only this specific spot. No footprints, tracks, or animal prints marred the area. Even Rufus wouldn't enter, growling and backing away from the edge. I circled slowly, poking the ground with a stick. The dirt was dry but carried a faint metallic scent, almost chemical, like burnt copper. I avoided touching it directly. Clara stood silently, staring at the patch as if it held a secret she couldn't voice. We circled twice, searching for any unusual evidence, metal scraps, plastic pieces, anything that might explain the scene. Nothing turned up. We snapped a few pictures on my phone and started back. A new, unusual silence hung between us, the air feeling thick and heavy. Rufus stayed close, occasionally glancing at the trees, seemingly waiting for something. That evening by the campfire, I couldn't shake thoughts of the scorched circle. I asked Clara about her experience. She described the area feeling wrong, with a quiet buzzing in the air she couldn't explain. Rufus refused to enter the tent, instead sitting outside and staring at the ridge where we'd seen the fireball the previous night. He growled steadily throughout the darkness. Sunday morning, the mysterious circle remained on our minds as we packed up and descended the mountain. Driving through winding forest roads, we noticed something odd on our phone compasses. They spun slowly, slightly off-kilter, though GPS functioned normally. Both our phones showed the same strange behavior. The Saturday evening run started like any other in Oak Ridge. Around 6:30 p.m., the neighborhood settles into a quiet rhythm. Street lights begin to flicker as the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across houses set back from the road. The temperature hovered around 75 degrees, warm but not oppressive. My usual route took me down Elm Street toward the park, a peaceful time when rush hour and children's noise fade away. Just me and the steady rhythm of sneakers on pavement. That's when I noticed the black van near the old community garden, window panes cracked, paint peeling. What caught my eye was its complete lack of license plates, front or back. It sat there, seemingly without purpose. I slowed my pace, glanced over, but didn't think much of it. Platelets vans aren't uncommon in this area. Painters, contractors, they often park unmarked vehicles. But this one was different. No company logo, just a plain black van existing in the space. I continued running, headphones on but not really listening. My playlist shuffled through some old rock songs. Once I looked back as I crossed to the park path. The van remained exactly where it was. The rest of the run proceeded normally. No strange sounds, no suspicious figures. Later that day, something else entirely would capture our attention. A fireball that defied explanation. We returned home with an unsettling feeling that lingered for days. Rufus refused to go near the backyard, and Clara kept asking if what we'd seen was real or some kind of trick. I've since scoured online resources, checked fire reports and meteor sightings, even contacted the local ranger station. Nothing. No reports of crashes or wildfires. My mind keeps returning to that scorched circle, unnaturally clean in the midst of untouched forest. Something happened there, though evidence was minimal. No wreckage, no smoke, no sound. Just a burned patch of earth and a dog unwilling to approach. I can't explain what we witnessed. Was it a physical phenomenon or some bizarre light display? One thing remains certain. It wasn't any meteor I've ever heard of. And Rufus still avoids that ridge, a silent testament to whatever occurred that day. I grabbed the paper from the driveway, and my eyes were drawn to the black van again. It sat in the same spot as the previous night, but something was off. The entire vehicle was coated in a thick, white frost. Windshield, side windows, roof, all covered in a crisp, frozen layer. This made no sense. The weather report had promised a mild, humid night with temperatures never dropping below 70 degrees. Curious, I stepped closer and touched the frost. It felt cold and solid, yet when I pulled my hand away, the icy layer remained completely unchanged. No melting, no shifting. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a leftover party prank or fog machine effect, but that wasn't typical in our neighborhood. Peering through the fogged windows, I could make out empty seats and what looked like a tarp or blanket in the back. No movement. The doors were locked tight, absolutely silent. I decided to call the police and report an unregistered, plateless vehicle with this bizarre frost situation. The dispatcher said they'd send someone to investigate. I waited, but no one came. When I checked later that afternoon, the van remained exactly the same, frost intact, and strangely, the pavement underneath was completely dry with no water puddles. By evening, I expected the frost to have melted, but it hadn't. During a late-night walk around 11, I noticed something else peculiar. The streetlights above the van started flickering in an unusual pattern. Not a steady blink, but a slow, deliberate pulsing of dimming and brightening. I watched the pattern repeat 3 times before it suddenly stopped. Just as I was about to turn away, a soft humming caught my attention. It was a distant, rhythmic electrical buzz. I scanned the street, searching for its source, but found nothing. No power lines, no transformers, no obvious explanation. The van remained silent and frost-covered. Monday morning arrived, and I half expected the van to be gone, but it wasn't. It sat there, unchanged, a mysterious presence that seemed to defy all logical explanation. The van appeared one morning, clean and black, without license plates. Something felt off. The grass beside it was crushed flat in a perfect rectangle, as if it had materialized overnight, with no tire tracks or pavement marks. When I mentioned this to my neighbor Sarah, she said she'd seen the van, but hadn't thought much of it. "You sure it wasn't there before?" she asked. I was certain. I run this route every day. Tuesday morning, Officer Ramirez knocked on my door. He wanted to know if I'd noticed the van and asked me to describe it. I told him everything: the missing plates, the strange frost that didn't melt, the humming and flickering lights at night. He listened carefully, nodding, but remained serious. "I'll check into it," he said before leaving. That night, the van was gone. The grass returned to normal, with no trace of the crushed patch. I felt relieved yet uneasy, like something remained unresolved. For the next week, I ran the same route. No van, no frost, no humming. Then, about 10 days later, something caught my eye. A faint, bluish light flickered at the park's edge, like a reflection, but with no water nearby. I tried to focus, but it vanished. My watch read 11:13 p.m. I walked home quickly, my heart racing without explanation. Afterward, strange things started happening. My phone would lose signal near the park, working fine everywhere else. Sometimes I'd hear a low hum, seemingly coming from underground. Nothing significant, nothing I could prove. I never saw the van again. But when streetlights flicker just right or the air feels inexplicably cold, I can't help thinking about that mysterious plateless van and wondering what it was doing there on that warm summer night. That morning, something felt off when I let Jasper out. Normally, my border collie mix would bolt into the yard, circling and sniffing everything, but this time he froze at the edge of the patio. His rusty brown coat and white chest patch stood out as he remained motionless, ears flat and tail tucked low. I followed his gaze to the solar-powered pathway lights I'd installed last summer. They were supposed to line the stone walkway from the deck to the garden gate, casting a soft, warm light every night. But that morning, they were all dark, strange for a bright, cloudless day. Walking over, I checked each bulb carefully. They weren't broken. No cracks, no damage. The glass was clear, the bulbs perfect. I twisted one out for a closer look. Completely fine. No scorch marks, no melted plastic, no burnt smell. Each light was the same, intact but dead. Jasper stayed close to the porch, refusing to move closer. When I called him, he growled low and backed up, staring past me toward the garden gate, as if something was there. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe he'd spotted a raccoon or neighborhood cat. But then I noticed the silence. No bird chirps, no rustling leaves, just an unnatural, heavy quiet blanketing the yard. This wasn't normal. I went inside to grab my phone, planning to take pictures for my landlord about the broken lights. When I returned, Jasper was even more tense, his whole body stiff. I looked around but saw nothing. Tired and maybe a bit paranoid, I decided to go about my day. Later that evening, during a walk with Jasper, a cool, foggy dusk settled in, the streetlights dulled by a strange mist. On our return, I noticed something else that made me uneasy. I'd been feeling uneasy since Mrs. Hricks mentioned the light problem. She caught me walking by, waving and commenting on the yard's odd lighting situation. I nodded, trying to brush off the weirdness. Truth was, my own lights had been acting strange a few nights back, but I'd chalked it up to storm interference. Jasper's behavior worried me more than anything. He'd become skittish around the yard, refusing to play or even chase his ball near the path. When I'd try to coax him outside, he'd whine and press against the back door. One evening, he even growled at seemingly nothing, teeth bared and muscles tense. The yard itself started looking strange. Small circular dead spots appeared near the path, perfect patches where nothing would grow. The soil felt warm and dry, with no signs of digging or disturbance. I called a handyman to check the solar-powered lights, but he found nothing wrong with the wiring. One foggy evening, things got truly unsettling. I was sitting on the deck, sipping tea and watching Jasper sniff around the garden's edge. Streetlights blurred into orange halos through the thick mist. Suddenly, a low buzzing sound emerged from the dead spots. It was faint, almost like a distant insect swarm, but when I looked closer, nothing was there. Jasper's ears perked up. He stared intensely into the fog, muscles tight. I tried to move but felt frozen in my chair. The buzzing stopped as abruptly as it began. When I finally flicked on the porch light, I saw shifting shadows at the yard's edge, dark figures without clear outlines that vanished when I blinked. That night, sleep came in short, restless bursts. Jasper stayed close, occasionally whimpering and looking toward the windows. Something wasn't right, and I knew it. I went into the woods behind the house, hoping the fresh air would help clear my head. Jasper trotted alongside me, more relaxed than he'd been in days. Bird songs and rustling leaves filled the air, with sunlight cutting through the trees in thin beams. Back in the yard, everything changed. Jasper froze near some dead spots on the lawn. When I knelt down and touched the grass, it felt brittle, like it had been dead for weeks. This made no sense. I'd been watering the lawn every single day. That evening, the fog rolled in heavier than before, and the buzzing returned, louder and closer. Strange lights flickered just above the dead spots, like fireflies, but too steady and synchronized. I grabbed Jasper and rushed inside, locking the doors. Things got weirder over the next few days. The dead circles slowly spread along the walkway. Jasper became terrified, whining and pacing, refusing to leave the house. One night, I heard soft tapping near the window facing the yard. When I looked, nothing was there. My friend Carla came by. She's not someone who gets easily spooked. She carefully inspected everything, the dead patches, the mysterious lights, searching for any logical explanation. She took soil samples, looking for critters or insects that might explain the buzzing or dead grass. Nothing turned up. Maybe it's some kind of mold or fungus, she suggested. But her tests revealed absolutely nothing unusual. That night, she witnessed the lights with me. From the kitchen window, we watched little clusters of soft white and blue lights moving just above the ground, fading out one by one. I tried replacing the lawn lights with new ones wired directly to the house power, but they still wouldn't work near the dead patches. Lights farther away functioned normally. Jasper would only approach the yard's edge if I held him close. Eventually, the dead patches stopped growing. The buzzing disappeared, but the lights on that side of the yard never worked again. I don't understand what happened. I can't explain the lights or why Jasper was so terrified. Now, whenever I look at the lawn, I see those dark spots. I remember the unnatural silence, the strange buzzing, and Jasper's absolute fear. These days, I keep the porch light on at night, just in case. I apologize, but it seems that no text was provided in your message for me to rewrite. Could you please share the original text you would like me to restructure?